lot of these figures, cabinet figures, people who are involved in stories of note, we make ongoing requests for them. We have ongoing requests for them, and we would like to hear from them on a regular basis. That goes for people on both sides, like the Speaker Pelosi, for example. We have an ongoing request, and they have some system of determining who they want to talk to and when, balancing among news organizations and whatever, although you will have observed that this administration is particularly available to Fox News. So this is not a surprise. But it is particularly important now because there are so few briefings, right? I can't remember the last time there was a briefing at the White House. There's been a lot of debate in our field about whether these briefings are even useful or not. One of the media writers said we should send the interns because it's just stenography, because what they're saying is not, anyway, you understand. So Steve Inskeep had the last interview with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. It was about 6 months ago. We put in another request on behalf of the network. It was determined that Mary Louise should go because she had just come back from Iran, and as you know, the escalating tensions with Iran, I'm hoping you all are familiar with this, and it's quite consequential. She, in setting the interview up, told the Secretary of State that she wanted, his communications person, that she wanted to focus on Iran, but she would also want to introduce other topics, namely Ukraine. This is in the email chain. This has been reported. I'm not telling you any secrets. This is a matter of public record at this point. And, she asked 10 questions about Iran before moving to the Ukraine portion. The Secretary of State took issue with her questions. He then demanded that she follow him into a private living room where he proceeded to curse her out. He also demanded that she not bring her recorder with her or the other people on her team. I find that highly unusual. As a broadcaster, I don't go anywhere on a high-level interview alone. I would have a technician to ensure that the audio quality is first rate. I would have an editor, and I would have a producer, so that there was another set of eyes. So to demand that she follow him into a private living room, I find highly irregular, where he proceeded to curse her out, had his communications person bring an unmarked map, which he just happened to have. I don't know, do you just happen to have unmarked maps lying around? And said that, demanded that she point to Ukraine. She has a master's in European studies. She knows where Ukraine is, which she then did. He then issued a public statement calling her a liar. She reported this after some consideration about whether she should report this. She felt she had to report this. And, the rest, as you have recounted, he called her a liar. She is not. He issued some strange statement saying that, oh, by the way, Bangladesh is not Ukraine. I don't get it. Belarus is just north of Ukraine, so I'm thinking, speculating, don't know, that maybe he messed up the burn. Then subsequently, the Secretary of State is on a trip to Europe, and our diplomatic correspondent, Michel Martin, a 20-year veteran, was removed from it was her rotation to be the radio pool reporter. When there's limited space and every news organization doesn't have room, we have a pool system where each representative of different media, a television pool reporter, a print pool reporter, a radio pool reporter, usually a wire service pool reporter, will go and then we pool, because it's quite expensive, and then share the information. She was summarily removed from the flight. I leave it to you to use your discernment to determine what you think the facts are here. I have laid out the facts as I know them and as have been reported. I know there is an email chain. It has been publicly reported saying that this was the topic she wanted to discuss. Now, I could speculate about whether perhaps the communications person didn't communicate that fully. I don't know. I don't believe that it, well, I'll leave it at that. I will say that the Secretary of State has not disputed the substance of what I have recounted to you. And I leave it to you as citizens and as voters to determine whether you think that's an appropriate way to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. Where it seems that people have a fundamentally different concept of what truth is. And I don't think it's a partisan statement to say that this particular moment, there's a whole different context to this that did not exist. I mean, I'm dating myself here, but I've been covering national politics and policy for 30 years. And I have never been in a moment like this, where the truth of your eyes is denied. Not just, Muslims celebrating 9/11 didn't happen. The largest inaugural crowd in history, not true. This is the truth of your eyes. And yet there's an insistence on it. And so this is why I say that this is an existentialist issue. Because, I understand that there are those who believe that this is a stylistic thing, right? And I recognize that. There are those who say that this is this is just style, and that people should get over it. It's just, that's just, that it's flamboyance, it's a sort of a tool. And I say to you, and part of the reason I came to you today to say what I had to say is that no, in a free society, we have to be able to have shared facts so that we can come to negotiations, as you said. That is the only reasonable approach, unless it is entirely a matter of 10 beats 9. The strong do what they will, and the weak do what they must. And, so yes, as journalists, we discuss this all the time. At least we do, those of us who consider ourselves to be trying to serve the broader public and not a faction. And look, it is obvious. You all are adults. I don't need to tell you that there are certain news organizations who seem to be very committed to, arguing the case of a particular ideological group or particular administration. And there are others that are not trying to do that. We see ourselves as being here for everyone. But it's very difficult when people don't care what's true. So this is why I say you need to care what's true, and that has to be a standard. I will say that one of the things I found really interesting about the current moment is that prior to this moment, the people who I was most acquainted with who liked to make things up were celebrities. Because they thought it was okay, I found it really fascinating that, my sister's also a journalist and she used to work for People magazine. And one of her big scoops, I hope I'm not, revealing any secrets, but that she discovered that the origin story that Captain and Tennille told about themselves, like how they met and how they got together, was completely untrue. They just made it up because it was a good story. And when she brought this to her editors, they were horrified. They were like, oh no, this is not what we planned. Oh my God, this is not what we wanted. Because it was, throughout my career, I've had, celebrities, like actors, threaten to walk out if you raise something that everybody knew was true about them. And, you're like, but it's true. Or it just didn't conform to the image they had of themselves. But it's really quite a different thing to bring this into the realm of decision making that affects all of us. You know what I'm saying? Will Smith doesn't have the nuclear codes. I don't know if I've satisfied your answer, but we are not satisfied that if you read any of the major news organizations that have a public editor or the media critics, some of them can be mean and superficial, but that is the central question that they are continually asking, which is what is the correct approach here when you have people playing by vastly different rules and expecting you to accept them just because they said so. And if you don't accept them, they will find a way to retaliate against you. One example, Sarah Sanders, the press secretary following Sean Spicer, who of course is no longer there, but it doesn't matter because they don't have press briefings anymore, so whatever. There was one day, and she decided she wouldn't answer any questions until the journalists said what they were grateful for that day. It's just completely inappropriate. And so some of the people actually did it. Of course, you can imagine who. And so the other reporters were in this weird position, like, what do I do? And when one of the reporters refused to answer, she says, well, you're not playing by the rules. So the reporter, to her credit, said, I'm grateful for the First Amendment. Things about that, and again, I'm not making excuses, I'm reporting as I understand it. The big late surge Donald Trump won the election in the last 3 days. And it's true, there was a big late surge in the last 3 days, and polling is notoriously unreliable in the last 3 days. It used to be, we didn't even go into the field in the last 3 days because it was considered rude, it was considered biased, and it was too subject to manipulation by like push polling, for example. For example, if you were to report on something, the reason 3 days was that, let's say you report something, it's not accurate. The other candidate or something has been maligned, something's untrue, you then you're correcting it on election day, right? So that's why in some countries, you are not even allowed to publish polling or publish certain information in the 3 days prior to an election. That convention has completely disappeared for competitive reasons. And everybody's like, well, they're doing it, so we have to do it. I mean, so it's not a good explanation, it just happens to be the truth. So I think that the data was, honestly, I have on good authority, Donald Trump didn't even think he was gonna win. Because the polling was so off, he didn't even think he was going to win. So they weren't being, the Clinton campaign, the media, the pollsters weren't being cocky or ignorant or whatever. The tools were just inadequate to capture the reality, and they still are. And then you couple that with the determined disinformation campaign, and I don't want to, is it blame, is it accountability, responsibility to go around for why that issue was not attended to. There's a lot of blame to go around about why the disinformation. People who work at Facebook and who worked at Facebook back then, who have since left the company, have been very vocal about the fact that they knew this was happening and didn't do anything about it. Okay, so, and there's a big debate in tech about whether or not they're doing anything about it now. And Facebook has announced as a policy, it will not correct or false information. They will continue to allow false information to be promoted by campaigns. They have already said this, which is why you see Elizabeth Warren troll them by making a video, and if any of you saw it, basically saying a whole bunch of crazy stuff just because she goes, okay, you happy now? Just basically making a whole bunch of wild stuff. She was doing it deliberately to let you know it was false, but that was the whole point, to point out that they've said this is a matter of policy. Twitter has a different policy, Instagram has a different policy. So it's really all over the place. And that's why, again, I have to ask you, as concerned citizens, what role are you going to play in this? Are you going to take responsibility for what you share and post and distribute when you don't know where it's coming from? So as to what we're doing differently, we have a lot of people on the ground. The Democrats aren't making it easy for us because there are just so many people in color. We're so tired. I'm doing my part. I'm going to be in South Carolina, even though people think it's a poor go. So we're doing our part. We're spreading out. Like all of the hosts have states that we're responsible for. We're all fanning out. You saw in 2018, because I know you listen to me religiously, that we all fanned out in the months before, like 2 months before the election. We all found out in 2018, and we kind of felt like that was really helpful. So all of the hosts have been assigned to, so we're doing our part. Now you're asking, is it going to be different? I'm looking for my notes. You wonder why I have this big, thick folder up here. Part of the reason is that I want to be accountable to you. So if I cited something that you wanted more information about, I wanted to make sure I had all my citations at the ready. And yes, I'm old school, and it's easier than looking it up on my iPad. I have all those too, but I'm sorry. You want to know what's different? There's a number of bellwethers that are just very different than they were even 4 years ago. For example, who do you think is leading in donations from members of the US military? Which candidate, would you guess, has the most contributions from active duty military by far? Thoughts? Guess? Anybody want to guess? Huh? Bernie Sanders. It is Bernie Sanders. Yes? I'm looking for my glasses now. Yes? Yep. According to the latest numbers from the Federal Election Commission, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines have donated a total of $185,000 to the Sanders 2020 campaign. They've given $113,000 to Trump, $80,000 to Buttigieg, $64,000 to Warren, and a paltry 33,000 to former Vice President Joe Biden. A complete change from 4 years ago, when Donald Trump by far had the support of active duty military. And it's true that officers tend to lean conservative, but the rank and file troops are overwhelmingly supporting Sanders. That is a big change. Swings can happen. For example, the Asian American vote in 2008 was very split. By 2012, it had swung almost 80% for Obama, which was a significant factor in certain places. So swings are taking place, and that is one of them, which I think is really interesting. You know? Okay.
Particularly in light of the argument that Alan Dershowitz made as a defense for the president, do you think that this is ultimately the end of the RICO equal branches of government?
Oh, sure, like I'm gonna really answer that. Love you, but no, because I like working. I don't, I don't know. There've been a lot of, a lot has been written about that even today. I will say in fairness that Mr. Dershowitz says that that isn't what he said, even though we all heard him say it, but he says that he was misunderstood, so that he was not arguing for, I know when I was there, I wasn't sitting right there in the Senate, well, but I was listening to it, I was staring at it with the headphones on the whole day. So he now says that that's not what he meant, but as to the question of whether the guardrails have been broken, I think that there are a lot of people who argue, including, I would say, people at the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, who argue that executive power has been on a slow creep for well preceding President Trump, and that his particular add to it is his particular style, which is to demean people that he doesn't agree with, and the name. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The name calling and his sort of style of expressing opposition is particularly what it is. But that from the standpoint of the actual expansion of executive power far predates him. And then there are those who would argue that this is really Congress's fault. But Congress has failed to assert itself appropriately, in part because of for a number of other factors. I will hazard I do think it's appropriate to my role to say that I think that efforts to address redistricting may be a corrective to that. This is something that had been of bipartisan concern, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, the former governor of California, and Eric Holder, the former Attorney General of the United States, have teamed up to get involved in redistricting, because their argument is that part of the problem here is that the districts have been so manipulated to advantage one party or the other that there's no incentive for moderation, and so therefore it's become a Congress of extremists, and so that inhibits their ability to advance their institutional interests, because they don't see themselves as institutions first. They see themselves first as the advancing an ideology or political party. So that is something to consider,